Today on CityCast DC, Arena Stage is one of DC's most prestigious theaters. But this month, its biggest drama happened offstage. The theater's artistic director was abruptly ousted, and the fallout has been bitter, with accusations of racial bias and workplace toxicity and stories about allegedly making staffers go fetch your groceries. Rebecca Ritzel reported on all this for NOTUS, and she's here to share some dishy details. Today is Tuesday, July 14th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
So we've known each other a long time. You're a freelance journalist who covers theater in Washington. And you recently wrote a banger of a story. It appeared in NOTUS. And it was about the news that has come out of Arena Stage. Hannah Sharif, who is one of only a few Black women leading major theaters in the country, resigned under pressure. You discovered through the course of your reporting that employees of Arena called it an extremely hostile work environment. I definitely want to get into the ins and outs of that, but I thought we could start by talking about Arena and what it means to DC. Sharif had only been there for a few years. She came with a strong national reputation. Why did the board choose her? And what did they hope she would bring to Arena Stage, this longstanding institution that they are in charge of shepherding?
Yeah, great starter question, because I think it is important, and I think some people in DC may have been to Arena Stage but not fully understand its role in the history of American theater. I just turned 75 years old, and Arena was part of the beginning of what we call the regional theater movement, which is the idea that instead of just Broadway and touring shows, and then before that the legacy of vaudeville touring, that individual cities needed their own homegrown theaters, and that this was an important place to incubate stories. And Arena, from its inception, has been about incubating great American works, not Shakespeare, not classics coming out of Europe. And Zelda Fitzhandler, who founded Arena, was one of sort of a mother of the regional theater movement. And then Molly Smith, who had been there for 25 years, was really well regarded, not only in Washington, nationally and internationally. For example, in her last couple of years, she had a relationship with the Shaw Festival in Ontario, where there was some director exchanges going back and forth. So what the board had to do was, as we say in my story, replace a legend. And I think it has been a trend, especially post-2020, for theaters that have had a really influential artistic director who may have been white to seek out a person of color. And I think that is a very well-minded intention. And I think in Hannah Sharif, they saw someone who had been at a smaller theater company, previously had an associate role at Center Stage up in Baltimore. So she was a bit familiar with the region. And I think those are part of the things that made her a really attractive candidate to the board.
So they were very excited when she was hired as a person with a very good reputation.
Yes, I would push back on the good reputation part, because as we've seen, and I think there was a lot of protest coming out of St. Louis even when she was hired.
So what happened then? I mean, I guess some of this past stuff was sort of resurfaced, but what has been the experience of Arena during her tenure?
So 3 years of chaos is, I think, a very common refrain. And I think that who experienced that chaos kind of definitely differs by account. I think Hannah really made an effort to treat visiting artists extremely well. We've seen that come out on Facebook posts. I heard that from one New York actor who I communicated with. It's internally the staff and production crew that really bore the brunt of the chaos. So a series of things that happened. One that's important is that Arena Stage's backstage crew unionized. That was, I think, more than 70 people voted in that election, and 85% voted to join the union. And that had not been the case under Molly Smith. The union had well, I should say that in order to keep employees from unionizing, Arena Stage had a handbook that basically tried to have union rules, but without being in the union. And the contracts that were written for crew were also definitely quite similar to the actual union. So what HANA did is come in and blow that out of the water and insist on working conditions that were very different from the handbook and from the contract.
Can you give me an example?
Crew. Sure. A specific example, and it's in my story, is work hours. So it was in the contract that crew had needed an 8-hour break to sleep. That doesn't seem like a really hard ask, but it was for HANA. And there were multiple nights, people say, when they were kept there very late at night and then asked to report back very early in the morning. These are during what we call tech rehearsals, when it's like the actors are on stage and we're trying to get the lighting right. We're trying to make sure the scenery is moving. And those were not honored under HANA.
So there were a lot of other examples. I mean, you had someone in your story referring to it as not 3 years of chaos, but 3 years of terror.
Yes.
And like even allowing for the kind of hyperbole that theater kids are prone to engage in.
Yes,
How did this person justify this use of this absolutely incendiary word, terror? What are some of the specifics that you found in your reporting?
Okay, so this from the first production under HANA, which is Cambodian rock band. It was chosen by Molly Smith, but that takes us back to like August 2023. And then you look at the program for Crazy Sexy Cool, which just opened. You can see that we're down to less than 36 employees. So that's a turnover of, depending on how you count, about 75 people who left the theater in 3 years. That's a lot. And some of those departures are people who were fired, they say, without cause, without warning, kind of like, here you go, you have a meeting, here's a box. Go pack up your desk, we're escorting you out. And they instant loss of access to email. And these were firings without plans. Two employees say that their people they are the education employees. And this is especially important because we're dealing with public school kids here who had their after school programs disturbed. And they're just gone. Those employees were just not there, could not answer the phone, could not do their jobs, and there was no plan in place to replace them. And people just lived in fear of getting fired without reason. And at the same time, they're being asked to, as I quote one source, do the impossible.
Here is something from our sponsors at the DC Department of Behavioral Health. DC is turning a corner, and the numbers back it up. Fatal opioid overdoses dropped 33% in this city from 2023 to 2024. That's not just data, that's real people, real families, still together. But the work isn't done, and neither are we. If you or someone you love is struggling, help is closer than you think. Text LiveLongDC to 888-811 to connect with treatment, housing, and recovery support right here in the district. Free Narcan is available at nearly 40 locations across DC because nobody should lose someone for lack of access. And if you're in crisis right now, call or text 988. Know your worth, know your alternatives, know your value, know yourself. Recovery is possible. Find out how at knowyourpathdc.com. Besides the 8 hours of sleep, which I don't mean to downplay it, but what are some of the other examples of quote unquote the impossible?
So it would be some of the demands in terms of sourcing things and getting things done in really short amounts of time. So this is, I didn't choose this anecdote, but Trey Graham did in his Washingtonian magazine piece, which some people should read as well as mine. Hannah wanted a pool on set. I am told that there's differing accounts of this. I'm told the playwright didn't insist on having a suicide occur in the pool on stage. And that required having the pool fill, you had to let the pool get something like 30 gallons of water out of the pool during the show, then put the actor into the pool via a door, and then shut the door back up without it leaking during the production. And apparently Hana was just so insistent on this pool. It was taken out of the New York run, but there were multiple employees injured during this. Like, we're talking workman's comp stuff. We're talking people falling on the floor because it was so wet and constantly leaking. And in the meantime, because the tech staff was dealing with this pool, they couldn't get started on their next shows. Just costs really snowballed. And this is all, as I understand, a lot of this is preventable and due to Hana's decision. And I could go on. I know I have my own story about when I was reporting on their gala last year and the difficulty I had getting something as simple as pictures from the gala because Hana was insisting on sort of, as one source said, a really intense level of micromanaging while at the same time not having the focus or the time to realistically do all those things herself.
And the overall economic state of the theater, we're talking here about ambitious stage sets that are really, really expensive and maybe blue budgets. Was this taking place against a backdrop of the theater being in more trouble than it used to be with money? I mean, knowing that for any independent theater anywhere, money is always going to be a tight issue.
Right. Well, I think that the money thing, and it's interesting because there's been some thought leadership pieces saying, and some people saying that Hana was saddled with a lot of debt. That is really depends on which hand of the elephant the blind person is holding. So, and I would largely say that that's not accurate. So Arena Stage, as a lot of Washingtonians, as some newer people may not know, that there was a huge expansion project that opened in, I believe, 2010. And so there was debt that was a $120 million project. Bing Tong, the famous architect, designed it. And they were down to, when Hana takes over, they're still about $65 million on the mortgage. So that got paid off in 2024. And that was, as I'm told, largely the work of Edgar Dobie, who's over on the business side. So when you look at Arena's 990s, which are the public tax documents, it looks like Hana is taking over theater in 2023 with a huge debt load. What you're seeing there actually, though, is the mortgage, which then gets completely paid off. So they're sort of going back to zero. And then the run-up starts from Hana's production debacles. So I hope that helps a little bit painting a picture of why there are some discrepancies around what kind of debt load was she dealing with.
It does. But, I guess I have a bigger question. And look, this was the first Black woman to lead Arena Stage. On social media, I've seen at least some veterans say that there was a double standard, that stuff that other artistic directors might get away with, she was pulled up on. And a lot of the stuff you have just described, like blowing out the budget to make a sort of amazing, awesome set, asking the crew to do unpleasant, impossible things, micromanaging. I mean, these are probably not ideal behaviors, but these are things that one stereotypically associates with a lot of very successful and well-regarded theater people. Why is this a problem in her case?
Okay. That's a really good follow-up. I'll add that on the budget front, I think that you're partially referring to is the next show after the one with the suicide in the pool. Is Death on the Nile. The budget for the whole show was about $500,000. They ended up spending $500,000 on the scenic elements alone, including projections, having the set built in Canada, right? So blowing it out of the water. And then there's the question of, like you said, couldn't somebody get rid of this beforehand? Well, I think the pandemic changed things in so many ways. It changed the budget margins. Things were have been tighter just all across the arts. And you can't blow out budgets like that anymore. And then second, if you look in the reckoning for Me Too, for everything that we've seen in terms of Black Lives Matter, there are younger arts workers do not tolerate some of the stuff that they were put through 15, 20 years ago. And that's what we're running against up here. So if someone who is a Black woman tries to co-opt some of the behaviors that may have been associated with old white man who thinks he's a great artist and maybe
or
a
with
great
Molly
artist.
Smith.
Yeah, or with Molly Smith. People don't tolerate that. Younger art workers are going to put their foot down. And that's really what happened here. And I think what happened with the folks that I talked to is they're just saying no. There's one person who would like, especially the fellows, Arena Stage has a couple of fellows. And we had people, like some of those fellows were writing back to their mentors at their universities being like, I am not getting the experience that I was supposed to be having. And maybe 15 years ago, someone would have said, it's okay, Ahana is a great visionary. I'm just going to do whatever she wants. And now they won't do that anymore. So it's running up against the post-COVID financial constraints that's happening across the arts, and then less tolerance for the sort of classic artistic director flinging a scarf around and saying, do whatever I tell you.
So I think what I hear you saying is that this is less a story about one leader than something about a statement about the challenges facing nonprofit theaters and so probably by extension, the whole sort of creative world today, where the ground rules of what is acceptable budget-wise as well as behavior towards subordinate-wise have changed.
Yeah, a little bit, Mike. I mean, I think Arena Stage I think it's a little more unique than that because we have such a variety of norms being undermined here. Like I got into the nepotism with hiring her sister. There's letting school contracts slide at the same time as the personal spending issue. So I think that's like a different constellation.
You reported that she had a subordinate do her grocery shopping for her.
Yes. Now, I should say that I do not know that occurred on the regular, but there was definitely a sense from these younger workers. Like I talked to one who was doing a lot of bartending, who was bartending at the theater to make extra money, and Hana didn't like that. So if you can imagine, you're 20-something, you're bartending to make extra money on top of working your full-time job, and your boss is putting her groceries on the credit card bill for the theater and regularly getting to have her lunch covered, and your boss is making almost $500,000. So there's a lot less tolerance for that these days.
So one thing that struck me, after this, and it was a very abrupt departure. It was on the day the new show was opening, and it's all of a sudden this is the news.
Yeah, it's not abrupt in the sense that it was in the works for a long time. We do know that. So I should
say dramatic.
Yeah, okay.
One thing that struck me is how polarized the reaction has been.
Yes.
Do
gosh.
you find that is that just, look, this is what happens when you put something out into the world, social media is going to polarize? Or are you finding that people inside Arena itself and in the theater community itself are divided into camps?
Oh, yeah. So I think what we have here is DC and St. Louis versus the rest of the American theater community.
Explain the St. Louis piece.
Sure.
So I mentioned that before, too.
So Hana came to D.C. from the St. Louis Rep, which is sort of the largest, well, not counting the Mooney, there's a big musical theater, but sort of the largest year-round theater in St. Louis. It's a suburban theater, which is really an important difference between an Arena Stage. It's in a wealthy suburb. It's not downtown, no public transit. And Hana came from their budget was around, I think, $6 million a year. And then you go to Arena Stage that's got 6 times that budget. And you can tell by looking at the tax accounts that she ran up incredible budgets. After she leaves, and this is public and this is reported on, there's a big campaign to save the theater, that they were in so much debt. And I had an off-the-record conversation with a board member who said they really wanted to support her choices because her narrative has always been essentially like racist audiences didn't want to see more diverse plays. And the board member I spoke with said, I really wanted to support her choices, but she would not take any feedback once they knew that changing up so drastically and that some of the shows were not very good, would not take feedback.
So when you say St. Louis and Washington against the theater world, what do you, I think you're saying people who had personal experiences with Hana's leadership are negative on her and the rest of the theater world is not.
Yes. There you go.
What explains that dynamic?
So a couple things. I think one is just that we are, as an arts going culture, just really want to genuinely, I think there's a genuine desire to celebrate not only Black excellence, but excellence in the arts from people of color. Like, I think there's really just a desire to want to champion that. And if people thought that that's what Hannah was, they really wanted to celebrate that. And that runs up against this sort of behind the scenes or people from New York from really wanting to lean in to that narrative. And I think Hannah was also, by all accounts, very good at putting on a very polished performance for, maybe for the board. And
I would assume that that is true of any artistic director of any significant theater.
But it's very, I think it's quite telling. You can look at like those social media things. No one from DC, no leaders.
Did you find anybody in the theater world in the DC theater world to say a single nice thing about her?
I did not, no. So
did she talk to you?
No. And I sent a list of allegations. I typed them out. I texted them, including especially the personal spending and leaning into the cost overruns and hiring of her sister. So she had an opportunity to respond to all those allegations, and via a publicist would not respond, chose not to.
So when you have someone who's in charge of an organization for 3 years, and people are a wide variety of people apparently are calling it 3 years of chaos, 3 years of terror. Your piece alone and other reporting include a whole bunch of stories about her that I think you can characterize as poor leadership. I don't think I could go in my job for 3 years of chaos without my bosses pulling me up on it. So there is this sort of question of governance. What responsibility do boards have when they're looking at their own artistic director? They're looking at the work product, of course, the financing, fundraising, but surely they're also looking at the workplace culture. And did any of that happen in this case? Was there oversight?
I really appreciate you pointing that out, Mike. And it's really, I think, a good response to say, where was the board? Arena has a board of trustees. Now, those board meetings are run by Hannah and Edgar. It's not like an outside person comes in. But I think questions about where was the board are really, really key. And I talked to a arts leader I really respect, and a lot of people really respect. Emil Kang is a consultant out of New York, and he raised questions about the board. And he brought up the personal spending policy and being like, well, if there wasn't one, then what was Hannah really violating anything if she went out to lunch for $400? And it was the board's job to set that. And an employee saying, well, we didn't have that because we didn't need one under Molly Smith is like maybe not an excuse. So I think that, and the board didn't have a nepotism policy. But I think one thing that's important, especially on the board front, is I talked to Josh Bickford, who's a teaching artist at Arena Stage. And he sent me his email that he sent to the board president 2 years ago asking for a meeting. And she would not give him that meeting. And I just wonder, would we be somewhere else today if she had been willing to sit down and talk to this teaching artist who had been at Arena Stage for 15 years and said there's great upheaval. We're not able to meet our obligations for our after-school programs.
I assume arts organizations is a little bit like media organizations. You get promoted because you're like a really talented director, a talented actor, what have you. And then all of a sudden you're in this executive job where you're in charge of after-school programs and stuff that's maybe not your core competence. You'd think that a board would be, particularly if complaints start coming their way, would sort of reach out and find ways of like improving those skills. It's not rocket science. It's just not a skill everyone has. Did you talk to the board? Did you ask them?
Oh, I reached out to multiple members, and no, they would not. I mean, I will say that Catherine Gutman McCabe did acknowledge receipt, especially when I sent her a copy, but I asked her about Josh Bickford's email and gave her some information so that she could find that in her inbox. And they do say that they addressed it. He says he only received a call from HR, and that what he was dealing with in terms of are we going to be able to fulfill our contracts with public schools is not actually an HR question.
So since this piece, again, it was a really, safe to say, it's a very dishy piece. Those theater people can dish. What's the public response been to this piece? Have you heard from readers? I detect a sort of a lot of division in the public response, but what have you gotten?
So from readers, I've actually gotten several with the subject line, thank you, including 2 sets of volunteers from the St. Louis rep, which I just really touched my heart that they were just really grateful to see this reported. But I also heard from a former roommate of mine who works at a major theater company and said, I can't even respond publicly to your story or comment publicly on your story for fear that I'll be labeled as racist. So that's the environment that this story has gone out into, that outside of DC, and people are just so hesitant to comment publicly. One theater leader in New York posted the story on Facebook and took it down within an hour. So it's a real mix of people who are glad to see this come out and people who realize that this is just incredibly sensitive territory.
So she was the first Black woman to run that theater, but what was, like, how diverse was the staff when she, under her predecessor and when she arrived? The voices that you've got in the piece who were unhappy with how she led, who were describing it as chaos and terror, were those voices diverse, or was that all white people?
Very diverse. And I think one thing that's interesting is that under Hannah Sharif's leadership, there's also been quite a net loss in Asian employees at Arena Stage.
So where do you see Arena going from here? This is, like you said, 75 years old. It is an icon in Washington, the beautiful, relatively new building in a neighborhood that's suddenly become, it's like right across from the wharf. It's suddenly become kind of a sexy part of town. What happens now?
Yes, and on the subject of Arena Stage being sexy, Mike, Bing Tom, the architect who designed the Arena Stage, he also designed the Arts Center that's in the Prime series off campus. So if you have seen those scenes and been like, are they filming at Arena Stage? Very close. And if it gets you thinking that theater is sexy, that's fine with me. So where does Arena Stage go from here? I am worried. They only even have half a season announced for next year. And that's something that should have been finalized in February, right? So I think they're really going to have to rely on Edgar Doby's contacts to try to bring in
who is that?
Productions.
Just so people understand.
Yeah. So thank you. So Edgar Doby is the longtime president and CEO, but what that means is that he runs the business side of the theater, and he and Hannah are supposed to be co-equals reporting to the board. He was not her boss. So some of the productions that even Hannah was taking credit for were actually more Edgar's doing to bring them in, especially Damn Yankees, the show that opens on Broadway next year and was at Arena in the fall.
And who's going to be in charge of looking for a new artistic director?
Good question. The board takes staff input seriously on their next selection. Also, the arts tend to hire a lot of these. There are just a handful of search groups in the arts, and there are maybe like 4 or 5 in North America, and they handle a lot of the artistic director job searches. I've certainly had to do stories in the past for those search firms not doing a great job. For example, I've written for the New York Times about resume fraud that was somehow not discovered by the major art search firms. So the board will pick one of those 5 firms, and we'll have another search, and people will throw their hats into the ring. And in the meantime, Edgar Doby has got to come up with, at least 3 more shows in a very short amount of time when a lot of talent is going to be booked.
So the recent history there, I mean, Molly Smith, if I recall correctly, she came from Alaska, and Hannah was at a theater in St. Louis. So they, sort of bring people from somewhat smaller markets. If it was you, I mean, based on what you've learned while reporting this story, I mean, if we can assume whoever they get needs to be like a wonderful, like, judger of talent and creator of shows. But in terms of the rest of their CV, what sets you up to succeed at a place like Arena?
I think one of the concerns that I've heard from staff is that St. Louis rep was in some ways not big enough. You make a good point about Molly Smith coming from Alaska. I think times have changed from 30-ish years ago when Molly was hired, where I think now you need to have come from a bigger budget organization to step in with one that's got a budget of 35 million, that's sort of like 6 million to 35 million. And then having Arena Stage has 3 spaces and St. Louis rep is like doing 6 shows in one theater a year. And so Hannah was she was also a playwright. She even tacked on a workshop of one of her own plays to the workshop for Crazy Sexy Cool. So I think sometimes these things need to go back and forth. Do you want an artistic director who is a director? Do you want someone who's a playwright? Do you want someone who's more of a programmer? And I think my opinion is that Arena needs a programmer, especially at a time because they have these 3 spaces. And I know there are lots of people in DC theater who would like to see that smallest space shared with some of our other smaller groups who have lost their homes recently.
Before I let you go, this is also taking place at a moment of a lot of drama in the Washington sort of theater and performing arts world. The Kennedy Center obviously has sort of blown up, or whatever is going to happen to it. A big independent place like Arena, it would seem to me, would be fairly well positioned to take advantage of that opportunity. Is there, does that suggest there's a sort of a healthier outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a good place for optimism. Thank you for suggesting that. And I think it is true that there are arts audiences that are really looking for alternatives, and that overall, we've seen a number of theaters and a lot of arts organizations benefit from the loss of the Kennedy Center, as sad as it is. I think it's especially something to think about for around the holiday season when people want to get out. And there were so many holiday shows that were running of all sorts, running in and out of the Kennedy Center in December's. So it's certainly a window of opportunity. And you make a good point that it's an optimistic that you could say, hey, candidates for artistic director, what we're handing you here is spaces for a local audience that's really hungry and wants to get out there and support the local arts.
How about sheer madness?
But I think for our also, so the Arena Stage has been hosting short runs of Step Africa's holiday step shows, so they have done that. But yeah, or also Second City used to be did a couple seasons at the Kennedy Center over the holidays. So definitely, I think even if we can't get like share with more local cross-pollination in there, bringing in something like Second City is that's tourist friendly is a great idea.
Rebecca, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your interest in what you called my banger of a story. I appreciate it.
And thank you to our new members, Stephen R., Konstantin S., Talia D., and Janine T. If you want to get perks like ad-free listening and exclusive members' events and newsletters, head to membership.citycast.fm. It's $10 a month or $100 for the year. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and for goodness sakes, subscribe to the morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.